Today, December the 5th, 2023, I conclude my official visit to Algeria at the invitation of the government of Algeria. As Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, I am an expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council to assess the situation of human rights defenders globally. I'm an independent expert of the United Nations, and I'm independent from government, civil society and other actors. I came to Algeria without any preconceived ideas of what I might find here, and over the course of the last 10 days in Algiers, Tizi Ouzou and Oran met in good faith with scores of government officials, civil servants and human rights defenders. I would like at the outset to put on record my sincere thanks to the government, both for the invitation to visit and for the extraordinary efforts the authorities made to facilitate a valuable visit. The number of high-level meetings I was afforded demonstrates a commitment by the Algerian government to seriously engage with UN special procedures and to work towards better protection of human rights defenders. The overwhelming majority of these meetings were conducted in an atmosphere of mutual respect and constructive engagement. This is fitting for a country which sits on the UN Human Rights Council. I met with officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, the Minister for Communications, the Minister of the Interior, the Minister for National Solidarity, Family and Women's Affairs, the Minister of Justice and People of the Seas, the Minister of Religious Affairs. I also met with the Counselor to the President of the Republic on NGOs and human rights, the Walis of Algiers, Tizi Ouzou and Oran, and the National Council of Human Rights. The National Observatory of Civil Society, the High Authority for Transparency, Prevention and Fight Against Corruption, the National Economic, Social and Environmental Council, the High Council for Youth, the Algiers Bar Association, the Constitutional Court, and the Mediator for the Republic. I would like to specifically thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their exceptional cooperation, and the Ministry for Justice for accommodating my request to meet with detained human rights defenders in 3 different prisons, El Harash, Khalila and Tiaret. I also requested and was granted permission to attend the court on the day 3 human rights defenders, Jamela Luki, Kador Chukra and Said Badour, in Dar el-Baida were being tried. I would also like to thank the 50 human rights defenders I met who shared their stories and their challenges with me, and who, it must be said, took risks to meet me. It is clear to me that many human rights defenders are carrying out their work without any challenges, and are doing so with the support of the Algerian government. As my mandate charges me to recommend strategies to better protect human rights defenders, I prioritise meeting those in need of better protection. In general, these human rights defenders work on themes considered sensitive by the government, and sometimes monitoring human rights violations itself can be considered sensitive, which may explain the low number of such organisations. As highlighted by my colleague, the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Association and Assembly, who visited Algeria in September, official statistics state that out of over 137,474 civil society organisations in Algeria, only 25 have a specific focus on human rights. From the numerous meetings I held with government ministries, public officials and semi-state bodies, it is clear that public consultation and participation play a key role in the vision of a new Algeria which has emerged out of the Iraq and the 2020 Constitution. This is perhaps exemplified by Knesset, a newly established consultative council with 200 representatives from many walks of life, whose task is to advise the Prime Minister on economic, social and environmental issues and to draft laws with an overall objective of ensuring social cohesion. I welcome the provisions on gender equality and freedoms of expression, association and assembly contained in the 2020 constitutional amendment. Furthermore, I was very glad to hear in multiple meetings that the Algerian government is working to ensure that national law was compliant with both the Constitution and, vitally, international human rights law. The support by the government of Algeria for a number of recommendations relating to human rights defenders during the Universal Periodic Review at the UN Human Rights Council last year was especially welcome, and I hope these recommendations will be faithfully implemented. I note improvements in the ability of women and youth to participate in public life through various outreach and training programs which have been established since 2020. I was impressed with the work of the Ministry of National Solidarity, Family and Women's Affairs in ensuring that the economic empowerment of women, which is a crucial factor in enabling women human rights defenders to operate. Given my next report to the UN Human Rights Council will focus on the theme of youth and child human rights defenders, I was very happy to hear of the work of the High Council for Youth, and I look forward to seeing how their work develops. I also welcome the complaints mechanism under the Mediator of the Republic and public engagement mechanism set up by the various WALIs to help address problems faced by citizens and to ensure that they receive a hearing before they are allowed to escalate into something larger. With the issue of corruption being one of the lightning rods for the Iraq, it was encouraging to hear of whistleblower mechanisms in place and the protections offered to whistleblowers exposing corruption. I await the adoption and implementation of the new law on association, whereby non-governmental organisations can be created by declaration rather than registration, and was encouraged to hear of the growth of associations at local level over the past number of years. All in all, I do not doubt that many people working to defend human rights do so without any problem, and they are helping Algeria meet the aspirations of its citizens and fulfill its international human rights obligations. However, and despite the repeated assurances I heard from various government figures that Algeria is a country ruled by law and that everyone is treated equally before the law, it is clear to me that human rights defenders who choose to operate outside of the government-designed civil society framework face serious difficulties which also impact on their families. Furthermore, time and again I heard about the lack of transparency in relation to suppressive actions taken against human rights defenders, where little information was provided about who gave the order against them, on what authority, and for what reason. Numerous individuals made reference to some sort of political police force which would exist in the shadows and which would not seem accountable to any transparent oversight. Sadly, some human rights defenders I intended to meet refused or cancelled at the last minute for fear of reprisals. My visit was also overshadowed by a number of human rights defenders, members of civil society organisations, and victims of human rights violations being prevented from reaching Tizi Ouzou when I was there. As they travelled to the city, they were either stopped at checkpoints or detained in a police station for over 10 hours. exemplifying the lack of transparency noted above. When the human rights defenders asked why they were being stopped, they were simply told, "You know why. Orders have come from above." I was further informed that those prevented from travelling were under routine surveillance and regularly stopped when attempting to attend meetings, events, or other significant occasions. It must be remembered that following the meeting and the visit of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Association, an assembly in September 2023, a human rights defender, Ahmed Manseri, was arrested. I expect that any of the human rights defenders that I met with will be able to work without any restrictions as a result of meeting me. One of my first reflections from this visit is that the term human rights defender is too little understood in Algerian society. As per the Universal Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, a human rights defender is a person who, individually or in association with others, acts peacefully to protect human rights, to promote and to strive for the protection and realization of human rights and fundamental freedoms at the national and international levels. This work is legitimate, even if it is critical of the government's approach to or protection of human rights. Given the specific history of Algeria, I want to reiterate that in the execution of my mandate, I do not take up as human rights defenders, political activists, or persons who advocate, condone, or use violence. The vast majority of human rights defenders I did succeed in meeting told me they have been subjected to some sort of state interference with their peaceful activities. This constant monitoring and harassment has created a sense of palpable fear and frustration among those I met. One woman human rights defender who documents human rights violations and observes trials said, "Our dignity is being attacked because we are losing our credibility. We can't offer help to other people because we ourselves can't defend ourselves and our rights." Another individual, in describing the context of fear in which he worked, said to me, "As a human rights defender, I expect to be targeted, but I cannot accept the targeting of my family members." He was not alone in describing how the rights of family members were violated as a consequence of human rights work. And again, let me reiterate, I did not meet with any separatists, terrorists, or political agitators. I met with women and men who exposed corruption, who headed trade unions, who promoted cultural and linguistic rights, who provided humanitarian support to migrants and asylum seekers, who protected the environment, and who sought justice for the families of those disappeared in the 90s. Secondly, despite strong human rights protection in the 2020 Constitution, legislation remains on the books which is used to limit and sanction the work of human rights defenders. One of the most commonly cited articles of the Penal Code used to suppress the human rights defenders I met is Article 87 bis, which relates to terrorism. As I stated in nearly all of the meetings I had with government ministries, the definition of terrorism in this article is so broad and vaguely worded that it allows huge scope for the security services to arrest human rights defenders. I urge the Minister of Justice to consider amending this article to ensure that the definition of terrorism and related crimes are accessible, are precisely formulated, are non-discriminatory and non-retroactive. I hope the Minister will revisit this legislation on foot of my visit and in line with the supported UPO recommendation last year, taking into account the options issued by various UN experts and bodies over the past number of years, including the Human Rights Committee in 2018. Included in the definition of terrorism and throughout Algerian national legislation is the vaguely defined crime of undermining national unity. A charge which I heard from human rights defenders is being widely applied to them for a host of reasons. Kamira Knight Sid, a woman human rights defender and co-president of the World Amazigh Congress, the CMA, who promotes the cultural, economic and linguistic rights of the Amazigh people, was sentenced to 3 years in prison on such a charge. I visited Kamira in prison, where I was told that the specific charge against her relates to her brief attendance at a conference in a university where she was scheduled to conduct a human rights event the following day. Because the exiled president of the autonomous movement of Kabila was making a virtual address to the conference, she was later arrested and tried on charges of undermining national security, unity, and belonging to a terrorist organisation, the latter of which she was acquitted. Her case is currently under appeal and I called for her release. I was also very glad to hear that while in prison, Kamira is being well treated, and it was clear to me how fond the prison authorities are of her. I met another human rights defender, Ahmed Manseri, in pre-trial detention, who is being investigated on charges under Article 87 bis relating to interviews he gave to overseas media platform on protecting human rights. He also told me that he was arrested by the police in October, that when he was arrested by the police in October, a picture of him meeting the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Association Assembly was included in his case file. It disturbs me greatly that such a meeting would be used to build a terrorism case against a human rights defender. However, given that this was part of the evidence compiled by the police, I am confident that his case will be thrown out by the investigating judge once he concludes his examination of the facts. Again, I was pleased to hear that Ahmed is being well treated in prison, though he is mentally very frail. Others told me that they routinely self-censor for fear of being charged under Article 87 bis, with one human rights defender telling me that he reviews each post 10 times before he publishes anything on social media. The leader of a trade union related how this article casts a chill over what should be regular trade union activities, looking for employee rights, including strikes and sit-ins, while those advocating for the families of the disappeared through weekly protests may also be subjected to charges under Article 87 bis. I also heard how this law, among others, is being used to disconnect human rights defenders from each other, and that the fundamental freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution were not being afforded to all citizens. At one group meeting of human rights defenders, they expressed a deep appreciation for the meeting because it allowed them to gather together to discuss issues in a way that is normally not possible. An investigative journalist told me that recently we can't meet, so to have a large group to be able to meet and discuss these topics is extraordinary, and it will help release some stress. The isolation of human rights defenders is compounded by Article 95 bis of the Penal Code, which allows for 5 to 7 years in jail for the receipt of any form of funding or advantage from a non-Algerian to perform or incite acts likely to undermine state security. In practice, and given the wide interpretation and vague definition of what acts constitute undermining state security, this means that human rights defenders are prohibited from accessing resources from outside Algeria to carry out their work. I note this is in contravention of the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, which states, and I quote, that everyone has the right, individually and in association with others, to solicit, receive and utilise resources for the express purpose of promoting and protecting human rights and fundamental freedom through peaceful means. At least one organisation with whom I met had had its accounts frozen under this law, while another human rights defender, a woman, told me that because they don't know what might be interpreted as undermining national security, using overseas funding to convene a dinner meeting of like-minded human rights defenders could lead to charges. This law has also created a hesitancy among those I met from interacting with foreign interlocutors, including embassies in Algeria, whose governments have published guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. As I relate to the Minister of Justice, I fully recognise that violence and terror have blighted Algeria's history and marked the Algerian people. The deeply felt trauma, fear and chaos of that period still resonate strongly. No one wants to go back to that, and it is the duty of the state to ensure that its citizens are protected from such violence. I also understand that strong legislation is necessary to squash any possibility of terror at the earliest possible stages to preserve life. All that being said, I fear that the arsenal of laws designed to do this are permitting state actors to reach beyond the original purpose of these laws to turn order into control. Human rights defenders and civil society organisations need to be able to breathe, to organise and to meet freely and to publish their ideas and criticism, all of which are protected rights in the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. Preventing them from doing this both builds their sense of frustration and exclusion and robs Algeria of their energies, capabilities and their services to the community. It also risks building a society on very shaky foundations. Thirdly, and related to the above, I had the opportunity to meet representatives from bodies created since the adoption of the new constitution: the Observatory of Civil Society, the High Council for Youth, the Mediator of the Republic, the High Authority for Transparency, Prevention and Fight Against Corruption, and the National Economic, Social and Environmental Council. They have developed strong mechanisms to provide social services and avenues of complaint to Algerian citizens. Unfortunately, these bodies are not yet reaching or trusted by all civil society actors and organisations. It strikes me that it's almost as if there are two parallel realities and two parallel civil societies with strongly contrasting approaches. One adheres fully to the newly proposed governance structure and methods, while the other remains outside the accepted structure because they operate in a manner not accepted by the government. Trust still needs to be built. I strongly encourage both these bodies and human rights defenders to meaningfully and in good faith engage in order to allow proper collaboration, consultation and participation of all parts of society, including those parts where views and approaches may be very different. I also encourage human rights defenders to give these bodies a chance to operate. I am convinced a culture of respect for human rights can be jointly built. Fourthly, I have been disturbed to hear from many journalists, bloggers and social media users who publish information on human rights violations that they feel they take great risks each time they make a post or write an article. I was informed of a number of journalists who have been jailed because of their writing. Because freedom of the press is not guaranteed in practice, many human rights defenders use social media to advocate for their causes I was told that even commenting or reacting to somebody else's social media post can be dangerous. Although the Constitution protects journalists from criminalisation on account of their writing, there are numerous articles in the Penal Code, including 144, 144 bis, 140 bis 2, 146 and 147, which criminalise contempt towards the President, public officials, institutions, the parliaments, the courts, the army and the judiciary. Restricting or prohibiting speech on the grounds that it insults or shows contempt contravenes international human rights law on freedom of expression. In its General Comment 34, the UN Human Rights Committee noted that the mere fact that forms of expression are considered to be insulting to a public figure is not sufficient to justify the imposition of penalties, and it expressed concern regarding laws on lèse-majesty, disrespect for authority, disrespect for flags and symbols, defamation of the head of state, and the protection of the honour of public officials. It also said that state parties should not prohibit criticism of institutions such as the army or the administration. I visited in prison a human rights defender and whistleblower, Nuruddin Tunsi, who was sentenced last month to 2 years in prison for posts on social media networks. And he is somebody that exposed very, very serious corruption, including the importation of cocaine. His case is also under appeal, and I hope he will be released. I was happy to hear that although he is suffering some health problems, he does also appear to be well treated in prison. Fifth, during my meetings with different human rights defenders over the past 10 days, the same pattern of violations used to suppress them were noted in the various meetings. I will outline 4. 1. Ongoing judicial harassment through multiple criminal cases taken against human rights defenders. Most people I met had either been in prison at least once in their life or were facing criminal charges. On Sunday, I visited Dar el Baida Court, where 3 human rights defenders were due to be tried that day on terrorism-related charges. Kader Shuka has been arrested 8 times since 2019. He was vice president of Ash prior to its dissolution and the national coordinator of the Union of Journalists. Of the Union of University Professors. Jamila Lukil is a retired journalist and photographer, and she has been arrested 4 times in the same period. Said Badur is a journalist, a former member of Ash, and has worked to defend the rights of migrants and political prisoners. It appears to me that by straying away from the sanctioned methods of human rights activism and by touching on these so-called sensitive issues, these defenders are perceived by the security forces as problematic and so warranting close control. I was also informed that it is increasingly difficult to find lawyers willing to take on the cases of human rights defenders for fear that they too will be targeted or will face other professional repercussions. 2. The key human rights organisations have been resolved, including the Algerian League for Human Rights and RAJ. According to the government ministries I met, the Algerian League was dissolved because it could not satisfy administrative requirements of the government. There appears to be no effort made to resolve the differences, with confusion on both sides. The League was a long-established and fundamentally important human rights organisation. It played a vital role in monitoring human rights violations, conducting outreach to citizens, supporting vulnerable communities, and generally raising the level of human rights awareness among Algerians. It is clear it was doing all of this outside the official framework of government-supported civil society, and it leads me to wonder if it was targeted because of this. Notwithstanding the above, I am hopeful that when the new law on associations is adopted, it will be able to retake its place among civil society organisations in defence of human rights. And I hear similar concerning reports relating to the dissolution of RAJ, which was forced to stop its work under Law 2006 on association, following the visit of a Tunisian delegation to their offices during the Hirak to express their solidarity. The reasoning given for RAJ's dissolution, that prior authorisation was needed for a partnership with a foreign entity, even though it was simply a solidarity visit, again strikes me as an overly severe sanction. 3. A commonly cited violation against human rights defenders is the limitation of their freedom of movement. Many also reported routine surveillance. In addition to the incident in Tizi Ouzou above, where a number of individuals were prevented from travelling to the city, I was also informed by human rights defenders elsewhere that their photographs were taken by men in civilian clothing with walkie-talkies as they entered the venue where the meeting was to take place. Some further told me that when they met the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Association and Assembly in September, they were followed and harassed for a number of days. The freedom of movement of certain human rights defenders is also controlled through the use of travel bans, or ISDNs, which prevent them from leaving the country. Multiple human rights defenders informed me that they were not permitted to travel, nor were they given any formal notification of such an order. They only discovered that they were banned from travelling when they attempted to leave the country. 4. I was particularly struck by how ground down many of those I met appeared, with the impact of stress, insecurity and fear clearly evident in their manner, and the toll it has taken on their mental health and the mental health of their children and their families. One human rights defender told me that the new generation sees them as a failed model due to the relentless pressure and persecution that they face. Despite all the openness afforded to me by multiple government ministries and the repeated assurances I received from them on the situation of human rights defenders, I leave the country disappointed by the opportunities being missed, or to embed full respect for the work and legitimacy of human rights defenders in Algeria. I encourage the government of Algeria to view human rights defenders as allies rather than a potential threat to the stability of the country. I do see cause for hope. In extending an invitation to my mandate to conduct a visit in the first place, the government is clearly indicating its openness to properly engage on human rights defender issues. It would have been much easier for them not to respond to my request, as so many other states have done. The prison visits granted to me were unexpected and really appreciated, greatly appreciated, both by me and by the imprisoned human rights defenders. I am also encouraged by the acceptance by the Ministry of Justice of numerous recommendations to human rights defenders in Algeria's Universal Periodic Review last year. As we mark the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and the 25th anniversary of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, the government must choose whether it wishes to fully commit to the values contained in these two seminal documents. There is a clear path forward if the political will exists. I believe much progress can be made, and I stand ready to support the government on this. I offer the below recommendations as a first step in the process. So for the government, obviously, as the rapporteur on the protection of human rights defenders, my first recommendation has to be that they release all human rights defenders imprisoned for the exercise of their freedom of expression, opinion and association. Secondly, ensure that non-state actors do not intimidate or target human rights for their work in connection with the environment or corruption, as per the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Third, amend articles in the Penal Code which relate to terrorism and undermining national unity, including Articles 79, 87 bis, 95 bis, 96, to ensure that they conform with international standard, which hold that the definition of terrorism and related crime should be accessible, precisely formulated, non-discriminatory and non-retroactive. Fourth, amend articles of the Penal Code which allow for criminal sanction for insult or contempt of individual bodies or institutions, including Articles 144, 144 bis, 144 bis 2, 146 and 149, restricting or prohibiting speech on the grounds of insults or shows contempt contravenes international human rights law and freedom of expression. Next, adopt the law on associations to enable registration by declaration, ensure widespread and ongoing consultation and dialogue with all civil society organisations in the country, including those who work specifically on sensitive human rights issues. Embrace human rights defenders as allies who can meaningfully contribute to public life in Algeria and publicly recognise their legitimate work. Refrain from limiting human rights defenders' freedom of movement, including through the routine surveillance and interference with their activities. Abolish the use of ISDNs to limit the travel of human rights defenders abroad. Implement the recommendations supported by the government of Algeria during its universal review process last year and draw on the support offered by the UN Office and human rights defenders in Algeria to assist with their implementation. Ensure that the National Human Rights Council is fully independent in line with the Paris Principle. And then conduct training on the UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders for government officials, the police and the security services. For the UN office in Algeria, I recommend, as per the Secretary General's call to action for human rights, further develop partnerships with and show solidarity to human rights defenders and civil society organisations, including those at risk, to contribute to a supportive environment for civic space, and to human rights defenders themselves and civil society organisations. I would ask that they remain open to meaningful engagement with the newly created consultative bodies and foster a broad range of alliances to constructively engage on human rights issues. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, I'll attempt to answer them. Yeah. Hang on.
Allô, bonjour.
No.
Bonjour, c'est Ali Bourneuf pour le site Middle East Eye. Je peux parler en français? Ok. Donc, ma question est de savoir qu'est-ce que répondent les autorités lorsque vous les interpellez sur l'article 87 bis? Parce qu'on a entendu parler qu'il y a un moratoire concernant l'article. Est-ce qu'elle confirme que cet article va être supprimé comme ça a été promis lors de la dernière session des Nations Unies pour le droit de l'homme? Merci.
I'm very encouraged by the Department of Justice, who assured me that they really want to look at this article closely and bring it in line with international law.
ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. كنت بالتركيا ممثل على المجمع الجديد للإعلام الجنوب الجزائري. سعدنا كثيرا بحضورك هنا في البلاد الجزائر. سؤالي في شطرين. الشطر الأول، خلال لقاءاتك مع السلطات ومع المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان، هل وجدت حقيقة النية ليكون تعاون ما بين الطرفين؟ وما يخص السؤال الثاني، أنت تجولت ونتقلت ورفعت حقائق وأدلة، ماذا ستقررون بعد هذه الأمور لصالح هذه الإثباتات اللي قدمتها على مستوى جهتكم؟ شكرا.
Well, this is a preliminary end of mission statement, and it is. We will go back and we will work on the statement and turn it into a report, which will be presented to the UN Council in March 2025. Meanwhile, we will be following up with human rights defenders and government officials to fine-tune our preliminary findings. When you ask, is there a willingness between government authorities and human rights defenders, I think that remains to be seen on both sides. I didn't ask them, it's just a recommendation that I've made, because I would like to see human rights defenders being accepted by the consultative bodies, and the consultative bodies working more for their protection. And I would also like to see that human rights defenders were not afraid to interact with such bodies. So we have to see how it goes. We visited, as you know, many places, and I think the statement gives an overview of the findings. So, I mean, there are challenges for human rights defenders, and it is the people who work on the most difficult and sensitive issues. It is the people who are exposing corruption. It is lawyers who are taking cases of people accused of terrorism. It is, and everyone is entitled to a lawyer. It is journalists who are trying to post articles or express their freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. It's the fact that human rights defenders cannot meet together because of the laws on association. It is also the fact that labour rights defenders who are working really for employees in companies that treat them badly and who are sacked because of that. I mean, we met many trade unionists who were sacked. Yeah, so I mean, it's and of course migrants. you know, those trying to ensure that migrants' rights are protected. That's a very sensitive subject. So and you know, it's all about judicial harassment. It's all about the misuse of the law. I mean, the Constitution is good, and the preamble is that, you know, the Constitution will look to international standards. But when it gets down to the actual, how do you put it, the actual implementation of the values in the Constitution and international standards, that's where the gap is. The laws are being misused against human rights defenders and need to be amended.
صباح الخير. كنت أخذ جورناليست فريلانس. أود أن أعرف هل تم التطرق مع الجهات التي التقيتم بها حول مسألة طالبي اللجوء المتواجدون خارج الجزائر، بينهم مدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان حول وضعيتهم، حول يعني هذه المسألة هل تم التطرق إليها؟ شكرا.
No, I didn't tackle any human rights defenders working on asylum seekers outside of Algeria. I would need to meet them first, you know. But I have done 2 reports on defenders of refugees, asylum seekers and migrants. One on Greece, where, as you know, there are huge injustices against asylum seekers trying to cross over into Europe, and defenders of migrants, refugees and asylum seekers have been criminalised, charged with things like aiding and abetting illegal entry, money laundering and even spying. And then I did another report to the General Assembly on the global position of defenders of asylum seekers, migrants and refugees. It is one of my priorities, and I certainly would welcome information about those defenders you're talking about so that we could follow up when we go home. Yeah.
تحية سيدة لور. لدي سؤالين. السؤال الأول، كيف يمكنك كخبيرة أممية أن تفرقين بين مدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان وهم يحظون بالاحترام طبعا، وبين ربما من أشخاص ينتمون لحركة انفصالية كخبيرة أممية، كيف تنظرين إلى أو تفرقين بين هؤلاء الأشخاص؟ السؤال الثاني، إن سمحت أستغل وجودك هنا في الجزائر للسؤال عن أحداث غزة. هل ترين الحرب على غزة تتضمن خرق لحقوق الإنسان؟ نعم أم لا؟ شكرا.
Thank you for your questions. First of all, I have been working with human rights defenders, well, specifically for over 20 years, but before that, another 20 plus years on human rights issues. I follow the text, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 1 says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. And then the Universal Declaration of Human Rights lays out the rights that everyone, just because they are human, are entitled to. And Algeria has ratified the covenants that give force to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is 75 years old this year. And then we have this other text, the UN Declaration of Human Rights Defenders, which says that everyone should be allowed to peacefully defend the rights of others. So coming to your question, I investigate any case that I take up, and if there is any doubt in my mind that somebody has used or condoned violence or is a separatist, I don't take them up. I don't take up any political activists. I go for the people. I go for the people that are just motivated solely by working for the human rights of others peacefully. And I can tell you, they are ordinary people doing extraordinary things, and they deserve support because they do it for other people, not for themselves. And it is always so moving for me to meet with human rights defenders who will put the rights of the most marginalised ahead of their own personal safety. I have, as I said, I know the difference between a terrorist and a separatist. I know the difference between a political activist and a human rights defender. I have built up all this experience, and if, as I say, if I'm ever in doubt, I have a motto: if in doubt, leave them out. So I hope that answers your first question. Your second question on Gaza. I think of Gaza as a wound to the soul. I have been to Gaza and West Bank twice. I have many friends there who are human rights defenders who've been documenting the violations against the people of Gaza for the last 30 years that I've known. And it is a source of great sadness for me to see what is happening in Gaza. I don't condemn I condemn the hostage taken by Hamas. That was wrong. It's a war crime. You don't take hostages. But what is happening in Gaza now is an obliteration of a people who are caught between the brutality of Hamas and the brutality of Israel. And they are the people that are suffering. I mean, when you see the little children wrapped in white shrouds, when you see the amazing work by the doctors who are human rights defenders, when you see the amazing work by the journalists, all staying there at great personal risk, and other doctors going in to relieve the exhausted staff, you know, it is really, to me, it is really amazing. I have given many interviews on this. I condemn absolutely what Israel is doing in Gaza to the civilian population. And really, I was just even thinking this morning, you know, children are literally being burned, almost. You know, you could say they're being burned alive because of the bombardment. Such is the extent of the atrocities. So I call for a ceasefire, I call for humanitarian aid, I call for you know, an international force to monitor what is happening there, and also that, you know, this risk of unfolding genocide is brought to the ICC. I have no compunction in saying all this. One thing that struck me as kind of strange here, though, in my own country and in cities all around the world, you have people coming out to demonstrate and to show their opposition to what is happening in Gaza. Now, I understand there was one day organised by the state, but it's kind of strange to me that the ordinary people, the ones who want to go out and show their abhorrence about what is happening and give voice to their personal trauma about what is happening. There's nothing happened in the last week. Every week in Europe, you have people in other countries. You have people, even in the States, even in Israel, you have people demonstrating. And indeed, one of the young women hostage, she was a child, one of the children who was a hostage and released by Israel, refused to meet Netanyahu because she said he was committing genocide. Sorry, it was very emotional for me.
صباح الخير. جهودي مرزوق من موقع الحضرة. طلعنا في البيان أنه كان هناك بعض نشطاء حقوق الإنسان في مدينة تيزي وزو كانوا متوجهين للقائدين، لكن تم توقيفهم لعدة ساعات إلى غاية لمغادرة المدينة. إذا بخصوص هذه النقطة، هل قدمت احتجاج أو طلب توضيح من السلطات لقيامها بهذا العمل؟ السؤال الثاني، سجلنا أيضا حضورك لمحاكمة قبل أمس بحضور رمزي، ولو أن الإخوة أو الرفاق تحصلوا والحمد لله على البراءة، لكن كشفوا خلال المحاكمة أنهم تعرضوا لانتهاكات خلال توقيفهم قبل سنتين. ما هو الإجراء الذي ممكن أن يتخذوه الآن معك، أو ما هو المساعدة التي ممكن أو الإجراء الذي ممكن أن تتخذيه أنتم في هذا الصدد؟ لدي سؤال أخير دائما في نفس السؤال حول القضية في غزة. رأينا أو اطلعنا منذ مجيئك إلى الجزائر بعض التعليقات فقط، يعني ليست الكثير من التعليقات السلبية على مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي بخصوص حضوركم إلى الجزائر، بدعوى أنكم لم تقوموا بأي شيء في غزة. إذا سؤالي، ماذا يمكن أن تقولي لهؤلاء الأشخاص؟ هل ماذا قمتم بالضبط؟ لأنه ربما الإعلام عندنا لا يتناول كثيرا الإجراءات أو تصريحاتكم بهذا الخصوص في الأوضاع هناك. شكرا.
Thank you for your questions. Regarding the people who were detained in the police station on their way to meet with me in Tizi Ouzou, or the people who were turned back at checkpoints, they didn't say they were coming to meet the special rapporteur, and they particularly asked that we did not make a fuss or create a publicity or make a diplomatic incident at the time. So we followed what human rights defenders involved wanted. Of course I raised it with the ministry. The ministry said that they couldn't look into it unless they tried to look into it, but we wouldn't tell them where the people had been detained in case. So we kind of left it like that, because my job is to listen to human rights defenders and to more or less do what they think is best for them. So that's where we left it. So we didn't give names or details of where they were detained. Okay? Regarding the trial last Sunday, one of the tools I have is to write these formal communications to governments about the situation of human rights defenders. And whenever there is a violation, as in the case, and Sophie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we did a communication, didn't we? As in the case with Jamila and her husband, and Said Budur, we did one of these formal letters to the government about the human rights violations that were alleged in the processing of their trial. So that's the way I follow up. I write to the government, they get 60 days to respond, and then it becomes public. And if any human rights defender has a complaint, I urge them to write to me, setting out the details of what has happened, when it has happened, and then I can write to with as much detail as possible. Then I can investigate further, and if I find that A, the person is a human rights defender, and B, that their complaints are legitimate, I can write to the government. I was pleased to be at the trial. I'm even more pleased that at the exit meeting yesterday with the ministry, they told me that there will be no appeal, that they are acquitted. I would like, of course, I understand that Jamila and her husband's daughter is about to have a baby, and they haven't seen them since 2018 and they can't travel. I would love if they were given permission to travel to meet their new baby grandchild as a grandmother. Very important. And the third thing about Gaza, well, you know, I'm not a state. I'm one person, like all of you, and all I can do is raise my voice, write articles, I've done interviews on Al Jazeera, on BBC, on CNN, on Irish television, I've done podcasts, in an effort to say the kind of things that I was saying to you and follow the situation in Gaza. But I'm not Israel, I'm not the US, I'm not Germany, I'm not the EU. I don't have any power. The power is invested in the member states of the UN. And yesterday I asked at the exit meeting if two things from regarding Gaza. I asked if Algeria would accept a couple of human rights defenders from Gaza because they want to be able to travel to lobby and advocate from their position of documenting and monitoring human rights violations now. I'm thinking particularly of a friend of mine, Raji Sourani, who is the director of the Palestinian Human Rights Centre. I've known him for many years. He has brought cases to the International Criminal Court long before the 7th of September, 7th of October. I'm thinking of Issam, who is the director of Al Mazen Centre for Human Rights. These are my friends. These are the people who have been there all the time. And I think it would be fitting for Algeria to offer a couple of them, you know, a place here as a base so that they can go to Europe and to the US to travel, to advocate for a ceasefire and for you know, the fact that in their view it is genocide. What do they say?
إذا كان فقط ممكن نكمل في هذه النقطة، هل السلطات الجزائرية وافقت أن ينتقل مدافع عن حقوق الإنسان من غزة إلى الجزائر من أجل إكمال مهمتهم؟
Well, what they said was they'd consider it. No, actually that was when I asked them to support the resolution on human rights defenders at the UN the next time. It comes up every year, and they said they considered that. They said I need to check. They did, yeah. I just checked with my two trusty warriors down there who haven't slept at all this week, trying to capture everything we heard, and they just confirmed that they said they'd look at it, yeah.
Bonjour.
Hi.
Bonjour, Zoël Aberkan pour Master News. Moi, je relève vos observations préliminaires, deux ou trois détails. D'abord, vous dites être venu sans aucune idée préconçue, donc en Algérie. Mais en fait, quelque part, vous êtes venu aussi avec une idée précise, puisque vous, très souvent, vous suivez l'actualité de ce qui se passe en Algérie, notamment sur les questions des droits de l'homme. Donc, vous ne pouvez pas être, enfin, on ne peut pas venir en Algérie comme une feuille blanche, donc sur laquelle on va tout reprendre à zéro. Ça, c'est ma première remarque. Deuxièmement, il y a un moment où vous évoquez donc les recommandations, si on peut appeler ça ainsi, au gouvernement de l'Algérie, et vous dites veiller à ce que les acteurs non étatiques n'intimident pas ou ne ciblent pas les défenseurs des droits de l'homme. Est-ce que cela voudrait dire que les acteurs étatiques pourraient se permettre de tels écarts? D'autant plus que nous savons que la répression, que l'intimidation, elle est systémique. Elle est le fait d'un État. Ça, c'est mon autre remarque. Ma dernière remarque, enfin mon avant-dernière remarque, sur votre page Facebook, vous évoquez une rencontre avec donc, le ministre de la Communication, et je vois que vous avez donc échangé sur les lois, sur la liberté d'expression, sur la liberté de la presse. Je ne sais pas d'abord si vous avez lu ces lois, parce qu'en fait, nous, quand on a décortiqué ces lois, elles sont beaucoup plus des lois répressives, des lois restrictives, pour ne pas dire scélérates, parce qu'elles, en fait, quelque part, c'est des lois qui ont été cousues main pour que, par exemple, plus jamais une aventure comme Rapporteuse ne se reproduise. Et là, à ce propos, est-ce qu'avec le ministre de la Communication, vous avez évoqué, pour aborder la question des 2 journalistes qui sont détenus, selon les autorités, donc pour des considérations qui ne sont pas liées à la presse, mais on sait tous pertinemment qu'il s'agit bien c'est en leur qualité de journalistes essentiellement qu'ils ont été poursuivis et emprisonnés. Voilà mes remarques. Merci.
Regarding preconceived ideas, obviously I am in touch with human rights defenders all over the world, and you build up a certain amount of knowledge about the situation regarding human rights defenders. But the whole purpose of a country visit is to hear both sides and to make a judgment once you have heard both sides, and to be impartial in the way that you approach the visit. And I came with an attitude of being impartial, because I have seen over the course of my 45 years in human rights, I have seen governments and states, a tipping point is reached. And so, you know, when you look at Latin America in the 70s, when I was around all the military dictatorships, when you look at apartheid in South Africa, when you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall, there is no point in writing off a state, because there are a lot of good things going on here in Algeria, but more needs to be done. So I repeat, although I had heard obviously from human rights defenders before I came, it was important for me to listen to the government, and because I'm supposed to make recommendations, that's the function, apart from the protection of human rights defenders, I'm supposed to make recommendations to the government about how they can act in accordance with international law. So that's what I'm doing. I want us all to walk forward together in a way that allows human rights defenders to be free to do their legitimate, and I repeat, legitimate work in accordance with international standards. Regarding non-state actors, I think you must have misunderstood, because the first recommendation was obviously to the state to release all human rights defenders imprisoned for their freedom of expression, opinion, or freedom of association. There is another category, and all the recommendations there are categories. The second category I was talking about were defenders who expose corruption In the case of Nuruddin, the defender I spoke about, that was in the port, and he was sacked from his job. But I also met defenders of the environment who are targeted by a range of actors who aren't state. There are some local authorities, it is true, but it is mainly people with vested interests in the forest or in the environment, where they want to build hotels without free, prior and informed consent of the population that it affects. They want to rescue women and children when there are wildfires. They have been attacked by landowners and cattle herders and a range of people. So that's what I mean when I say a non-state actor, because it's not just the state that is targeting human rights defenders in some way or restricting their work. It is also a broad range of non-state actors who have their own, and very powerful people who have their own interest in making sure that nothing changes. Regarding the laws, regarding the Minister of Communication, I think you will have noted in my statement that when I dealt at length with the situation of journalists and media workers, and that the fact that although the Constitution protects journalists from criminalisation on account of their writing, there are numerous articles in the Penal Code, including 144, 144 bis, 144 bis 2, 146 and 147, which are used against journalists, as well as 87 bis. And I raised obviously that with the Minister of Communication. We will follow this. This is just the beginning. We want to work with the government of Algeria to encourage them to make more progress in the defence of human rights and to allow human rights defenders to carry out their peaceful, legitimate work without fear of prosecution. Okay, two more and then I have to go. Airport. Sorry, you had a question. This man first.
Bonjour, bienvenue en Algérie. Karima Oudia du journal Moudjahid, madame, vous avez reconnu à l'instant que vous n'êtes pas l'Allemagne, vous n'êtes pas les États-Unis, vous n'avez pas le pouvoir, voilà, vous n'avez pas assez de pouvoir. La question se pose justement au sujet du rôle et de l'efficacité de votre mission, de l'organisation de l'organisation des droits de l'homme dans son ensemble, des structures des droits de l'homme dans son ensemble au sein de l'ONU. L'ONU elle-même mérite une réforme globale. On voit bien son efficacité par rapport au drame de la Palestine. Donc, est-ce que vous considérez qu'il est temps justement d'engager ce chantier de réforme pour que des missions comme la vôtre puissent percuter davantage, avoir de meilleurs résultats en matière de développement des droits de l'homme? Il y a certains États qui vous ont refusé, vous ont exprimé un niet catégorique, vous n'êtes pas la bienvenue. On aimerait bien savoir d'ailleurs s'ils sont nombreux, ces États. Puis, concernant la Palestine, vous avez appelé à la mobilisation de la force internationale. Soyez plus précise, est-ce que vous appelez à ce que l'ONU déploie ses forces, qu'il est temps pour l'ONU de déployer ses forces pour stopper le génocide, comme vous l'avez dit? J'aimerais bien plus de précision à ce sujet. Merci.
First of all, I want to say that obviously I think the UN Security Council should be reformed. because the states on that have a veto, and that causes a lot of problem. But of course, the states that are on, the permanent member states that are on the UN Security Council don't want to reform it. And that is a huge problem. Because at the end of the day, it is the states who are responsible for the protection of human rights. I, as an independent expert of the UN, I don't answer to the UN or to NGOs or to states. What my role is simply human rights defenders, to try and protect human rights defenders, to implement the declaration, to make sure that there is always a gender approach to my mandate, and to make recommendations to states. That is what I do. You could call it, I suppose, a little bit of moral authority or something like that, a little bit of soft kind of engagement with states, but I don't have any real power. And you're right, the Security Council has the power, and they do need reform, but I can't force that. They have to agree to it. Many states have made demands over the years that the Security Council will be reformed. But unfortunately, the member states, the permanent member states of the UN, don't want to lose their power. So that's the first thing. The second thing was, what was the second thing? Sorry, your second question was what?
About Palestine.
Oh, Palestine.
Avant la Palestine, est-ce que c'est possible d'avoir un aperçu, une idée sur les États qui vous ont exprimé le refus de venir effectuer des missions en leur sein? Concernant la Palestine, par contre, vous avez appelé à l'instant au déploiement des forces internationales. Donc, plus de précision, est-ce qu'il s'agit des forces de l'ONU qu'il faudrait déployer à Gaza pour stopper le génocide? Voilà. Merci.
Well, okay, so a lot of states say they give me what they call a standing invitation, which means I can go to the country. But the reality is that when you ask for an invitation, you don't get it. And I have to commend Algeria, because it is the only country in the region that has issued me with an invitation. No other country in Middle East and North Africa has agreed to an invitation for me, although I have asked. So that's one thing. When it comes to Palestine, I'm trying to think of what I can say. I mean, a lot of people all over the world, a lot of institutions are trying to stop what is happening in Palestine, including the UN. And if you look at the role of UNRWA in Palestine, I mean, in Gaza, there have been over 100 and probably 5 at this stage UN workers who are protecting trying to protect the people killed. Now that is unprecedented. There haven't been that many UN staff killed in any conflict since since the Second World War. And they are human rights defenders to me, because they're staying with the people, they're sheltering them in their buildings. So that I think, if UNRWA left Palestine, there would be nothing, absolutely nothing, because at least they are trying to hold the line and to bring in humanitarian aid and to try and assist the supplies of food and stuff like that, and water, and also to try and ensure that the hospitals, I know the situation is getting so bad that it is almost impossible. But apart from that, you know, until there is a political renewal, in my view, for the people of Gaza that is accepted by the states concerned, then we just go on like this, you know. And it has to be Israel, it has to be Hamas, it has to be the states like the US that have a big influence on Israel, and it has to be Germany, who are still suffering the guilt of having the Holocaust and over 1 million people killed. But when, you know, Gaza is on all our minds now, but I would also like to say, you know, in Sudan, 8,000 people have been killed or are starving at the moment. There are some in Yemen, in Syria, you know, there are atrocities going on and conflicts going on in so many places. And my last report to the General Assembly was on women human rights defenders and what they can bring to post-conflict, because they are there all the time, working with the communities, seeing to the needs of the communities, and they are the ones whose voices are excluded when it comes to peace negotiation. And they are the ones who will, we've seen it documented in so many cases, they are the ones who, if their voices were listened to, there wouldn't be all this macho men violence that we see all over the world. That's it, I have to go.
تعالى